Everyone, goeiemôre almal. I'm Audrey Drotsky, if you don't know me, and it's really a privilege to be here this morning in this discussion with Graeme Codrington here next to me. His wife Jane is also here. Where are you? You don't see her. She's still at the tea. But she's also very welcome. So I've done some reading before this morning, and I also I follow Graeme religiously on LinkedIn with all the interesting things that he does. And Graeme, I'm going to take a long time if I must tell the people everything that you do. So I'm going to make it as short as possible, but just some highlights that I came across. Graeme is a speaker and he's an author of 6 books, of which 5 are bestsellers, if I have it correctly. And he's also an expert on the future of work, which is currently a very important theme in business and in organizations, researching disruptive change and helping leaders and their teams to understand and to respond to tomorrow's world and respond to tomorrow's world today. And he also has a big interest in the generation theory, which we have discussed here in our church a while back. Then from a qualification point of view, which is very interesting and I think very relevant for our discussion, Graeme has 5 degrees, of which 3 of them are in the theologian field, in theology, and 2 are in the commercial world. So Graeme practiced theology for a few years and then moved more into this world of work and the business world. But he also writes still on Christian worldview and the future of Christianity. His wife is a pastor in the Methodist Church. So that is where you also related to them at the moment. So with all this experience and the background of Graeme, he's going to talk to us a bit about the history of the modern Israel and also how conservative evangelical Christians went from hating Jews to partnering with them, and the key principles of Zionism as applied to Israel's actions in Palestine today. I think we cannot find something more relevant in this day of the 17th of May in the world. Graeme, we really look forward to your talk and all the knowledge and experience you can share with us. We're going to give Graeme a chance to first give his talk, and then we will have some questions and answers after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey, and thanks to Rudy and the leadership team for the invitation. I think this is a very important topic for us to think about Zionism and maybe even Christian Zionism and where it comes from and how we should be thinking about it. For those of you who've joined us just for this session and weren't in the service just before this and for the video on YouTube, Rudy preached from Psalm 51. The psalm where David is confronted by Nathan and confesses his sin. And I thought it was just the most spectacular introduction to the topic. Because if the topic is Zionism, what is it that is behind the desire of the Israeli government to create this land for Jewish people? And what is it that is getting Christian people then to support that? I think, Rudy, your sermon leads perfectly into this, because the sermon starts with us thinking about we've got to confess our sins to God. We've got to look inside ourselves and say, it's not somebody else that caused me to do it, and it's not, I have sinned. But then Rudy went further to say, but we have sinned. And using the example of apartheid, we as a people group need to say, but we sinned. and it would have been a wonderful thing, maybe back in the 1980s and 90s, if more churches and more church leaders had said this was a sin, this was an evil, and we did it. And I think that that is what Zionism is doing, is that Zionism, the countries that support Israel, are all countries that were built on people coming from outside, taking other people's land and killing them to take that land. And I think it's a lot easier to say, but God said we should. Or we've got a 3,000-year-old manuscript that gives us permission to do this. So we're allowed to do this. And then if we've got an example of somebody doing it through God's instruction, then it gives us permission to be comfortable that we still live in the land that our forefathers stole. That's a strong start, right? Some of you are squirming already. Okay, relax. I'm gonna calm down a little bit. That should have been the end of the sermon. It's the beginning of a talk. I'm not extending Rudy's sermon, but I'm wanting to show you where I think Zionism comes from and why this is not a topic for the other side of the world or a topic for the newspaper headlines. I think as South Africans, this is deep in our souls. And I think if we don't understand this, I don't know who could. But I think we do understand it. And I think we live in a country that's trying to come to terms with what happens after you made a mess. And how do we fix it? And I think we could be a shining light to the world on what it looks like to keep living and keep living well when you've accepted that we made mistakes. Is that fair? Well, tough luck. I've got the microphone, even if you don't think it's fair. So, to help us to get to where we are today, we've got to go back to the past. And of course, any telling of history, there's no neutral telling of history. Yeah, the way I've started already, you realize there's no neutrality in how I approach things, but it's not possible. To tell 3,000 years of history, to tell even 100 years of history, you've got to pick and choose what you tell. I'm picking and choosing. You might be able to add extra data points in, but hopefully I'll do it justice, and you'll at least accept the story that I tell. Zionism, as we know it, goes back to a guy called Theodor Herzl, who was an Austrian journalist and born in 1860. And there was a particular case called the Dreyfus case. I'm not going to go through all of the details, but he was conscientized as a young journalist around the mistreatment of Jewish people in Europe, which was incredibly bad in the 1800s. We'll come back to that thought in a moment, because we were part of the problem. By we, I mean Protestant Christians. You might not know this, but one of the worst anti-Semites in human history was Martin Luther. But I'll come back to that in a moment. But Jewish people were very, very badly treated across Europe through the 1800s. And Theodor Herzl founded an organization for Zionism. And that was where the word comes from. And in 1897, they held a congress in Basel in Switzerland. And he put forward an idea. And he said, the only way that Jewish people are going to be safe and secure and happy and free in the world is if we have a land, if we have a nation. We have been spread throughout the world. God told us it would happen in our Bible, in the Old Testament. But actually, for our future, we need a place. We need a land to belong to. Bizarrely, one of the options was Uganda. And there was a big debate about going to Uganda and attempting to buy the whole of Uganda. And that debate came back again under Idi Amin a little bit later. And I think some Jewish people still think that the second homeland can be Uganda. And there's another debate even now about Argentina. And this is not just Israel. But I think, again, as South Africans, we know what land is, right? It's more than a piece of ground. It's a place to be and to become. So he put forward this idea, and he began to encourage especially European Jewish people to move to Israel. And they would gather money to buy up property. And the idea was, well, let me say it wasn't Israel, it was Palestine. Okay, because the land was called Palestine. It had been called Palestine for hundreds of years. And the people who moved there all became Palestinians, and they got Palestinian passports. A famous prime minister of Israel, Golda Meir, was very proud to display her Palestinian passport. There's a beautiful photograph of her holding up a passport of Palestine. Just in case we think Israel's been there forever, it wasn't. It didn't exist at that point. People went to Palestine, they became Palestinians, because Palestine has always been a united, diverse nation, filled with hundreds of churches and Christians everywhere, filled with hundreds of synagogues and Jewish people everywhere, and filled with hundreds of mosques and Muslims everywhere, integrated all together. And the idea 130 years ago was that people would just come and it would be one land together. Do you see a South African connection? How maybe the best way is not to separate us into different groups, but to be together. And that was the goal. And Jewish people came and they arrived every year, more and more came, and they bought property and they built businesses and they built synagogues next to the mosques and opposite the churches, and everything was going fine. And it was willing buyer, willing seller stuff. Then then the First World War happened, and towards the end of the First World War, when it was obvious that the Allied side of England and France and others had won, the British, being typical British, again, as South Africans we understand what that means, they came in and they went across the whole of the Middle East, and if you know the map of the Middle East, especially the borders of Iran, you will see that these borders were drawn with a ruler. They don't follow even a river. There's literally just a straight line. And that was the British. And they came in and they just said, we're cutting these countries up, and you can be called Iran, and you can be called Iraq, and you can be Kuwait, and you can be Syria. And they created all of these countries, causing a complete mess that we're still dealing with today. But for our story today, a man by the name of Lord Balfour created what we now know as the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was to say that in Palestine there should be a specific parcel of land given to Jewish people, and it should be called Israel again. This was a British politician. Now listen to the rest of the sentence carefully. Who hated Jewish people. We have proof of this, his pronouncements. The reason he did that was he wanted the Jewish people to get out of England. And he said, well, if you've got a place to go to, and it's even called Israel, that will make it a lot easier for you to just get out of England. Seriously. This was the basis of modern-day Israel, the Balfour Declaration by Lord Balfour, 1917. So that continued to happen, right? But now you've got British protection for more and more Jewish people to come and to begin to use the name Israel and to begin to see themselves as more entitled to the land. And then came the Second World War with the Holocaust. And this was a moment that Zionist people who believed that they should build this country of Israel, this was a moment that Zionists realized that there was an opportunity for them to be able to say, you see what we've been telling you. Jewish people are not safe in Europe. They were right. That was not incorrect, right? And obviously what Germany did to 6 million Jewish people during the Second World War is a stain on all of human history. But the response to that was to say, do you see now what Herzl was saying? Do you see now what Balfour gave us? Now we have to do it properly. And in 1947, Israel created and declared itself to be a country. And that's what they've literally just celebrated a few weeks ago, 79th anniversary of the starting of the State of Israel. But in 1948, on the 15th of May, Israel decided, with the help of a few foreign people assisting them, to say, okay, we're going to do this now properly. And again, I think you will be able to feel echoes of South African history. It's called the Nakba. It's an Arab word that is just, it's about horror. It's essentially the Holocaust again. But 500 Palestinian villages filled with Arab people were destroyed in the space of a few days. The army just rolled through these places, destroyed everything, killed everybody, chased more than 500,000 Arab people out of their land, out of their homes, and just claimed it for themselves. Of course, those Arab nations, with help from their friends, fought back. And that was the start of what is ongoing today. That there's a fight from the one side to take the land, and there's obviously a fight from the other side to say, hey, that's my house. That's my land. Why are you taking it? I hope then that you understand that the 7th of October 3 years ago was not the start of the war. That was not the start of anything. That was simply the next chapter in a long war that has been ongoing. Since then, we could put a pin every 10 years or so in a significant flare-up of the conflict. But essentially, the story is that since 1948, Israel has been literally day by day moving meter by meter into Palestinian territory. In early 1960s, the United Nations started to do resolutions to say, hey, guys, this doesn't work. And the United Nations now has hundreds of resolutions, all saying Israel, and here's the tough piece, and here's again the South African echo. You know what? You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have come from Europe and come and taken the land from the people who lived there. But sometimes in history, we just have to say what's done is done. Because if you look at every single country in the world, at some time, centuries, even millennia ago, somebody lived there and then somebody else came and took it. And how do you draw the line? Do you see the South African echo here? Do you understand why this should be a story that South Africans engage with? Because this is our story too. But at some point you just have to say, look, I wasn't here when they did that. I didn't do that. So now we are here. What do we do next? What do we do now? And the United Nations just has kept saying, Israel, okay, shouldn't have done it in 1948, but you did it and it's done. So keep your borders where they are now. Do not keep expanding your borders. And then Israel expands their borders by another kilometer. And they take another village and they take another 15 houses. And then the United Nations goes, guys, like, stop. And then Israel does it again. And then, of course, the Palestinians push back. Of course they would do that. Why wouldn't they? No one's going to say, okay, you took my house, that's fine, I'll go find another one. It's like, no, that's my house. Can I have it back, please? And that's been the constant push. And Israel keeps pushing, keeps pushing, keeps pushing, keeps pushing. I did warn you at the start, other versions of this history are available. But I'm trying to be as fair as possible, but also I am pro-Palestinian. Because I believe that my Bible teaches me to be on the side of the oppressed. But I also think history shows me there is a chicken and an egg, and we know who started this. I think that's clear. Now, what do we do about it is a different conversation. We'll get to that in a second. But now let's bring the Christians in. Because in about the 1960s, no, let's go back to 1945 again. We get to the end of the Second World War. And Christians were amongst the worst Jew-hating people on the planet. There were people who would stand up in church on a Sunday and would preach that Jews literally had horns. That's why they had to wear a yarmulke. Literally, they were taught that. This goes all the way back. Let me just go back to what I said about Martin Luther. After Martin Luther did all the wonderful things he did of pushing back against a very corrupt Roman Catholic Church, and he got the Protestant movement going, and he translated the Bible into German so that the normal people could read it, all the wonderful things that we celebrate of Martin Luther, and it gives us our heritage as Protestants. He was an absolute anti-Semite. He hated Jewish people. And he used and stirred up the language of it was the Jews who killed Jesus. It was the Jews who have been throughout history, the people who steal our money, and the people, all the most horrible things you can imagine someone would say against Jewish people. Martin Luther was that guy. He really was. And tens of thousands of Jewish people were killed by Martin Luther's followers on his instructions. Some of you are looking at me like, I'm 70 years old, I've never heard this story. Are you sure, Graeme? I'm sure. I promise you I'm sure. This happened. We don't teach this to ourselves, about ourselves. These are our people. These are the Protestants that we came from. And that anti-Semitism came all the way down through, but in 1945, we realized, oh my word, like we didn't mean to do that, right? Even though Hitler and the Nazis did it in the name of Christianity. They did it in the name of Jesus. And we realized, no. And so we changed to the Judeo-Christian tradition. We added that to say we have a joint history. We should have been brothers and sisters all along. But in the 1960s, in America, there was a big cultural war that took place. And if you know language of the moral majority and things like that, there was a war on liberal and progressive Christians on one side and then conservative Christians on the other side. And now I get back to where I started and thank Rudy for the sermon, which I don't think he realized would set up this talk quite as much as it did. Because I really do believe, and I think Psalm 51 helps me to understand how this works spiritually, that in the 1960s and 70s, the conservative Christians in America, not dealing with their own history of slavery and their own history of genocide and their own history of land theft and their own, think about this, if you were a journalist living in the United States of America in 1760, you would have had the same reaction to what the European settlers were doing in America as some of us are having in relation to Israel into Gaza. It's literally the same thing. But when you look, Rudy, as you preached, if you look inside your heart and you don't want to see what's there, then it's a lot easier to say, God told us to do this. And that's what Americans said. Americans said, God told us that this is our land. This is the new Israel. It's called, it's about divine destiny and, onward Christian soldiers. That's not a nice song to sing, by the way. It's a horrifying colonial anthem. It's interesting to me that all the countries that appear to be supporting Israel all, in fact, have exactly that story. England and Canada and the USA and Australia, they have that same story. Why is it that South Africa, that has the same story, supports the other side? Why is it that Ireland, which has the same story, supports the other side? I think I know why. Because I think we've tried, at least, and are trying, to say, well, what happens after that story? What's the next chapter after that story? I'm not sure we're getting it perfectly right, but I'd like to think we're trying in South Africa. Come back to that thought in a second. So in 1960s in the United States of America, conservative Christians began to have this Judeo-Christian view that we and the Jewish people must see ourselves as a single entity, and their history is our history, and we must support them. And the support for Israel became more of a political thing than a spiritual thing, but I'm hoping you can see the story of where it came from. My view of the story of where it came from, but hopefully it makes sense to you. And so now you have, in Christian Zionism, you have a group of Christians who says that if we support Israel and support what Israel is doing and give them, and now it's turned into money and military support to continue this, every day we take a few more meters until there's no Palestine left and it's only Israel. And by the way, it's not just Palestine. They have a view of David's kingdom. And really, we go back exactly to where you preached from. David's kingdom was a kingdom that included most of Lebanon, most of Syria, a little bit of Saudi Arabia as we know it today, quite a bit of Egypt as well. That's their actual picture. On the IDF, on the Israeli Defense Forces actual arm patch, if you look at the outline of the map that is on the arms of every Israeli soldier, it is a map of greater Israel. It's not just Israel, it's Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Look this up. It's there. It's literally on every single arm of every single Israeli soldier. They will not stop until they have that all. And that's the goal, for them to create this greater Israel, an ethno-nationalist state where only Jewish people, and I will go further to say only Jewish people of European origin, because they are getting rid of Ethiopian Jews as much as they are getting rid of Gazan people. This is a white ethno-nationalist vision. Do you see why South Africa should get involved? Do you see why, Rudy, the Bible under one arm and the newspaper under the other? And I think a history textbook in the back pocket. I believe there's one other thing we have to take account of, that the particular brand of conservative Christians in the United States who are Judeo-Christian Zionists also believe that Jesus will only come after two things happen. A great war in the Middle East between Gog and Magog, and the re-establishment of the Jewish temple on the mount in Jerusalem. I think that's a crazy reading of Revelation, but at least I can see where they get it from. Can you see why they don't care if Iran and Israel throw nuclear weapons at each other? That sounds a little bit like Revelation. And they would love it if somebody really dropped a nice big bomb on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, cleared out the Temple Mount, and they absolutely love the crazy Israeli politicians who raid the Al-Aqsa Mosque every now and again and say they want to blow it up and build the Jewish temple again. I know this might be a little bit unsettling for some of you. I know this might be very, very political for a church. But we have to be clear-eyed and open-eyed about what's happening and why it's happening. And I think we have to be open-eyed about the fact that it is coming from a theological tradition that is ours as Protestant, mainly white South Africans. There's a little bit of that heritage that lands with us. So what do we do about it? Well, if anybody knew, it would be wonderful. And if there seemed to be an obvious solution and we could just get everybody to talk to each other, wouldn't that be great? In an environment where it feels like there are no solutions, once again, I think it's quite special to be South African. It's quite special now to be a white South African. I think it might even, and I speak now as a Rooinek, might even be more special to be an Afrikaans South African, who is able to say, with what Rudy said in his sermon today, we sinned. But here we are, Lord. Restore us. Restore our land. Restore our people. We are people after your own heart. Help us to go into the future wisely. And I think, and maybe some more radical friends of mine, maybe a few of my black friends might want me to go further than this, because I think you can understand why there are people who still remember the houses that their grandparents owned and were kicked out of in District 6. This church is just a few kilometers away from a place that happened in this city. But I think sometimes you just have to think, well, we can't undo the past. David couldn't undo his past. So you have to say, how do we go into the future? And I think that South Africa may have answers from both sides, where the people who were wronged did not seek retribution. They said, well, how do we do this together? How do we share the fruits of this land together? And I think that's the most remarkable thing. I wake up every morning as a white South African and wonder what I would have done if I was a young black man in the 1970s. I don't think I could imagine that I would have been as nice and as forgiving and as open. I don't think I would be today, to be honest, if I was a 24-year-old black man with no job and no future and no land and no house. I don't think I'd be as nice as some of the people are to us, but somehow we are that. We are South Africans, and somehow we're working this out. I think we should do better. I think we should do more, but I don't think that we should say, God told us this land is ours. And I don't think that we should say, what's Donald Trump's latest thing? Peace through force, or some stupid statement like that. That just doesn't feel right, does it? As in our South African souls, that just feels wrong. And so I think that our task as South Africans is to own our history and is to say, look at where we've come from. Our story is Israel's story. Israel's story is our story, but we're a few chapters ahead. You guys can kill each other if you like. You can fight each other to the death if you like. But there is another way. There is a different way. And I think that we can then go to the Bible and we can read our Bible from cover to cover, and we can see that Jesus would tell us, without a doubt, there's a different way. Without a doubt, there's another way to do this. And instead of the Christians getting in the middle and then supporting an ethno-nationalist, racist, Zionist state, wouldn't the Christians be better to get involved to say, hey, my Jewish brothers and sisters, hey, my Muslim brothers and sisters, can we tell you something that a guy we take quite seriously, his name's Jesus. By the way, he's all the way through the Quran. They call him Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, in the Quran. We can talk about Jesus to our Muslim friends. And I think we should talk about Jesus to our Jewish friends. He was Jewish, by the way. So for me, this request, thank you, Rudy, again, thank you, Audrey, for the invitation. I've given you just the shortest history possible of Zionism and how we got to where we are. But hopefully what I can leave you with is why this is an important story in South Africa. It's not something happening on the other side of the world. It's something we have already lived through. We are living through it. We know the pain and difficulty of how you get out the other side, of people who were taught to hate each other, of people who stole each other's land, of people who fought each other for generations. And then you get to the other side and you say, now let's build a nation and a country together. Let's stand together and sing the same national anthem and shout for the same rugby team. And the rugby team wins, which is great. And we all love it. And I think that if people ask, but how do you solve the problem of Israel and Gaza? I think you say, well, look at Ireland. And look at South Africa. And that's why we take it seriously. There's 1,000 more words to say, but I'll go to Q&A now. Thank you. I'll stand here just for the mic, if that's okay. Okay.
This one is now, is it working?
No, you're not. They're on.
It's
Okay.
okay, I can...
But it's fine. We've got a mic in the audience. Yeah.
Any questions at this point in time? We can take 2 or 3 questions. I think we all have a lot to think about at this point in time. But anything that you would like to, Graeme, to add
Perfect.
to what he has said now?
And please, as long as you don't speak High Church Afrikaans, you're welcome to ask your question in Afrikaans. Okay. Go for it. Just stand and...
In my experience outside America, Britain,
Yeah.
a lot of the common man support for Israel is equal parts, I want to say, Zionism, also anti-Muslim.
Yes. Yeah.
How does that come into the mix in your experience, or like?
No, you're 100% right. I agree with you in that. I debated like how much, layers and layers. But I really do think that across a lot of the world at the moment, Islamophobia or anti-Muslim feeling is huge. Somehow in our human souls, we have to have an enemy. And I think that's the big enemy these days. So I think that's a huge layer on top of it. That if Israel had been invading some other nation or some other country, I don't think it would have as much support as it has now. And I think that we need to look inside ourselves as well and ask, if you are sitting here thinking, gee, Graeme, you've come on a bit strong here, I'm not sure exactly. But just asking yourself if you are anti-Muslim and also racist, because it's not just anti-Muslim, it's anti-brown-skinned Muslim people. And so I think that is very much part of it. Yeah. So, some hand down here.
Hi, thanks, Greg.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good history lesson. I think I totally agree with you. The starting point makes all the difference, but I think you picked that up very nicely. One of the things for me is, we've talked about the stealing of the land, we've talked about the repression and the killing, but I think the other side of it
And now I'm going to resist the urge to start another 45-minute sermon because Rudy, earlier in your, I don't know what the English translation is, but the vet section of the sermon, we're like, what is the law we need to consider today? Rudy talked about the law of love. Okay, so love yourself, love others, as love God, or the other way around in Jesus' telling. And if that is the summary of the whole law, and if that is what Jesus wanted, it's bigger than just that, because it's easy for us to love people who are similar to us and to love people who are easy to love. But that's not what Jesus said. And I'm not sure I want to argue with the translators of the Afrikaans Bible, but Jesus didn't say, love die naaste as yourself. He said, love others. It's easy to love the people who are closest to you. It's easy to love your family and, well, no, maybe not your family. God tests us with our family sometimes. But Jesus, I think, just over and over and over and over again, when his disciples asked him, but who is my neighbor? Who is die naaste? And he said that it's everyone. It's all the people. We don't get the sense of offense from the Gospels as we read it today when Jesus goes to a Samaritan, when Jesus goes to a woman, when Jesus goes to a widow, when Jesus goes to a woman on her period, when Jesus goes to a woman who's been bleeding for years, when Jesus goes to a blind person, when Jesus, like literally page after page after page, Jesus is just causing offense to his people. They would have booed him, hissed him, they even tried to kill him. That's how offensive his love was. And I don't think we go anywhere far enough in loving people who offend us. And that comes to your question about Muslims. And we have chosen who we are allowed to ignore and push out. And if you're a communist, well I mean, why Jesus doesn't love communists? And then, you know, if you sing Kill the Boer songs, then of course we can't love you. I mean, Jesus gives us permission to love you. How could you love someone who wants to kill you? Does the list go on? Can you see why this is a South African story? This Zionism story is our story too. And this is why when some people then go to Helen Ziller and say, if you want to be the mayor of Joburg, please tell us what you believe about the genocide in Israel. And she goes, it's nothing to do with us. No, Madam Ziller. It's got everything to do with us, because what you tell us you believe about Israel is you telling us what you believe about South Africa. How's that for being very political in an Ingeet church on a Sunday?
There's one
Thank you.
last.
Sorry, yes, we are now getting to the end of time, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be super controversial.
Please do, please.
Thank you for stating the bias up front, because I think the account you gave is remarkably biased.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know why you didn't mention the 1947 181 resolution of the United Nations to establish the State of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know from you what you would have expected the Jews in Europe to do
Mm-hmm.
when they're damned when they integrate and they're damned when they don't integrate. I'd also like you to explain why you left out the fact that between 1912 and 1947, the tit for tat between Arabs and Israelis was substantive.
Sure. And thank you for that. And that's a wonderful last statement / set of questions. And that is a wonderful counter to my self-declared bias of taking the press. And thank you for the way you asked the questions. Because all of the things, your name, sir? Dylan. All the things Dylan has said is true. Okay? And yeah, I could have easily said the United Nations was happy with Israel declaring a state of Israel. So, that's there. Didn't leave it out deliberately. And yes, this has been a backwards and forwards all the way along, right? And I suppose the reason that I chose to frame it the way that I did is because if we frame it the way that your questions frame it, there is only one end, and that is for one of the sides to win and the other side to lose. And in that particular small sliver of the world, which is not much bigger than the Kruger National Park, the only way there's a win and a lose is if one side completely obliterates and destroys the other. Now, no, but I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you, because if Israel doesn't destroy the Arabs will destroy Israel. From the river to the sea is used by both sides. Netanyahu uses that phrase as well, and it means there's only going to be one set of people who live here, and it's either got to be us or it's got to be you, and I'd prefer it to be us. So the reason I framed it the way that I did was not, and I don't want you to take away from this that, we must just love everybody. I want us to take away from this that there is another way. And call it naive if you want to, but I think that if you look at Ireland, if you look at South Africa, and there are only one or two other examples in the whole of the world, the only way we can get this done, and even then it's not easy and it's not perfect and it's not happy and it's not fun all the time, but the only way you can do it is if people agree to live with each other. I don't know how far we should or even could go back in history. I live in a house in Waverley. I don't know who used to own that house. And I don't know 200 years ago who used to live on the property I live on now. I don't know what I need to do to fix the past. I don't think I can, and I do own that house and I like it. So I would prefer that people who don't have homes don't come and try and take mine. And I'm trying to state both sides of the case. I'm not talking about my house in Waverley. I'm talking about Gaza and Israel. I don't know how far we can unravel the background. Now, here a lot of Palestinian activists are going to start shouting at me because they are now saying, yeah, you're trying to do both sides here. Because they say we do know where it is. We can go back to 1947. We have all the land deeds. We should be able to sort this out. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but if we do that, then your point is made. Because the only way we roll back then is we kick all the Jewish people out. And where do they go to now? Because many are there 2-3 generations. So what the United Nations has been trying to do over the last few years is to say, right, stop Israel, stop expanding those boundaries. And stop building walls between the communities of the Palestinians to break them down. And yes, of course, the message should come as strongly as that to the Palestinians, stop killing Jewish people. But I think, in my mind, when you look in that situation, to answer your question specifically, you look at who's got the power, and you look at who's not got the power. And Israel, for sure, has the power. So Israel has the greater moral responsibility to stop this, simply because that's how it works. 2 kids are fighting in the playground. One kid's 110 kilograms, 18 years old. The other kid is 7 years old and 40 kilograms. Are you going to tell the 7-year-old to stop fighting first? No, because the 7-year-old is going to get destroyed. You tell the person with more power to stop. I know I've got the microphone lost. It's slightly unfair on you. But, and I will finish in a second with this point. But here's the positive point that I hope joins us together. I'm not dismissing your questions. Your questions are valid and well put. Thank you. But I do think that the answer, if we could imagine how we could get there, I don't think the current leaders of either Israel or Gaza can get there. But if we could get there, we would have a place that was like Palestine in the 1900s, where Christian and Jew and Muslim lived alongside each other in peace. And whether we believe we can get there, whether we can picture how we get from here to there, I don't know. But I think as Christians, we pray for the peace of the world. And I think that for me, that is the only picture that I can see. Not because I can't imagine some mystical nirvana, but because I live in a country that's doing it. And that's why our South African voices are important. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you very much, Graeme. I think we all leave here with a lot to think about. And I want to say also thank you, Rudy, for starting it this morning, and the whole story just continues. I would like to just remind the people from Aan-die-Berg, hou dop vir die volgende gesprekke. Hierdie is 'n aaneenlopende gesprek. Ons gaan aanhou praat, ons gaan aanhou dink. Kyk uit vir Woord en Wêreld. The other people who are not part of our church, you are all very welcome. Watch the social media, and let's all talk together. I also believe that the more we can talk, and the more we can think, and critically think about what's happening around us, we might get to some peace and some peace of mind on what is happening in the world. So thank you for coming, and sorry for going a little bit over time, but I think it was worth